Welcome to Candidate Conversations, part of Delaware Debates 2016, produced by Delaware Public Media in collaboration with the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communication and with support from AARP. I'm Delaware Public Media News Director Tom Byrne. This conversation, recorded on the campus of the University of Delaware, focuses on the race for governor. And we are joined by the Green Party candidate for that office, Andrew Groff. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, we'll start with, why did you decide for governor? Run for governor, that is.
Oh, for governor. Well, I'm a born and raised Delawarean. I went through school here, Concord High School up in Brandywine 100. I went to University of Delaware. Went away for a little while with starting my career in the private sector, but I came back, and my love for this state has kind of compelled me. It's such a beautiful state. Our temperatures, everything, the lands, the seas, so beautiful. And I've always appreciated as a child growing up here, being in the Boy Scouts, etc. And you know, I look around and I see that there's some things that we can probably do a better job at in the state, and that's what compelled me to focus in on Delaware.
All right. Well, the governor's office is the state's chief executive office.
Absolutely.
So how would you describe the leadership style you would bring to the governor's office?
Well, I spent a lot of time in leadership in the private industry, working for Nike and working for Fila and some other large companies. I actually did some training on leadership in those, not training myself, but training other people. So, you know, a collaborative approach is always a good one, and having really good, talented people working with you is probably the best bet, a good, diverse group of people. And it's not even a party thing, it's just getting the people who are best at the challenges that we're facing here. And I think I'm eminently qualified to assemble that kind of team to do these things we need to do in Delaware to raise our stature and help our employment situation, help our environmental situation, all the things that Delaware is facing right now. And a lot of it ties back to education.
Well, let's talk a little bit more specifically about some of these challenges you're mentioning. Okay. We'll start with state revenue. Estimates for the coming fiscal year, not painting a very rosy picture. Some have suggested looking harder at the spending side of the equation. There's been a fair amount of discussion also about revenue, even some committees that have looked at the revenue side and how Delaware can change its revenue situation and revenue sources. Where do you think the priority should be on making sure that the state is on the right, solid budgetary ground?
Well, I think we have to stay within our means, absolutely, but I think we have some huge inefficiencies in our expenditures. I think there was a lot of pet projects, there was a lot of other questionable activity, I think, in the previous administration, and I've taken a look at some of those numbers, and I don't think we have the biggest problems that people think we do. I think we've misspent and misallocated a lot of funding, and we're not getting the biggest bang for our buck. And I think one of the areas is education. It's a huge budget issue. We're not getting the performance that we're looking for out of it. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think we have an opportunity with some fresh thinking, not looking at the status quo, not looking to Washington necessarily for answers, but actually tapping into our greatest resource in education, our teachers.
I do want to talk a little bit more about education later, but sticking with the budget, I did want to ask, one of the most difficult budget issues is healthcare costs, both Medicaid and state employee health benefits. What can the state do to address those costs, which obviously are rising each year? Well,
I think we're facing the same problems that we see a lot of other smaller states like Vermont and Rhode Island, Hawaii, et cetera, and looking at healthcare costs, and they're examining single payer as a response to that. And I think there's some credibility. The Green Party is firmly behind single payer, where we create the largest insurance group we can in our state and use that as a way to balance our costs out across a larger population. In talking with Jeff Cragg, who's currently running as a Republican for insurance commissioner, also other people in the government right now, they're very frustrated at their ability to work directly with virtually the single insurance company we have to deal with in this state. So I think looking at some of those other options, talking to some folks in Hawaii and Vermont and Rhode Island about what they're doing, and we can find a good solution. And I think single payer is where we're going to end up. We just have such a smaller comparative group to larger states that we can't get the rates we need, so this is causing budget overruns, et cetera. I think we have to look at the things systemically.
Well, let's talk also about ways to increase revenue. And one thing that a lot of people have talked about is trying to find ways here in Delaware and really anywhere to broaden your tax base. Concerns about creating and retaining jobs have obviously been in the news a lot, particularly in the wake of the Dow-DuPont merger. What steps would you take if elected to help boost economic growth, raise wages for people working in the states, and create jobs here in the first state?
Well, I think that's a critical issue, and I think what we've seen up to this point is a lot of our politicians looking for the home run, looking for the Dow-DuPont thing, looking for another MBNA, looking for another big home run hit. And they're always swinging for the fences, but they're not hitting a lot of hits. We need to improve our base of small and independent businesses here. There really aren't good programs to keep small businesses or to encourage small businesses to develop and grow in Delaware. It's very challenging in this state, and we're uniquely placed in the East Coast with our tax advantages, with our wonderful resources, good education facilities, and higher education to be able to get these startups going here. And there has been small movements throughout the state to do that, but I think we could ramp that up, because that's what's going to stabilize our tax base going into the future, not some behemoth that comes in here and holds their feet to the fire for all kind of concessions and whatnot. DuPont wanted $27 million just to stay in the state they started in. It's ridiculous. So we have to find ways of getting those entrepreneurs back into this state, showing them it's a great place to start up a company. You're well placed in your markets in the Mid-Atlantic. Delaware is a perfect place to start a new business.
Let's circle back to education, which you talked about earlier. It's obviously been a pretty contentious issue in the state over the past couple of years, from plans to redistrict Wilmington schools, to schools opting out and parents opting out of state assessment tests, to really basically just how schools are funded in general, particularly for city schools. There's clearly amongst the public some serious concerns about where education policy is going. What do you think the state should be doing to improve education?
Well, let me put you in the right environment. Both of my parents were public school teachers in Delaware here, so we have some rather stiff opinions on that. But I think it gets back to community. I think it gets back to the teachers themselves. I think we've wasted a lot of money. I think we've taken some bad direction from Washington in the hopes that that money will trickle back to Delaware. We're surrounded by some actually pretty good educational states. New Jersey's got some really great plans and things like that. Granted, they have a larger tax base, but what they're doing in their schools and how they're handling things is working quite well. I think we need to learn from success. We have some schools in this state that are doing very well. Now, we get it back to money, 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 money. All right, it always comes back to that. And so then we go looking for money instead of looking based on what we have, what's the most we can do with it? Our costs per student are very high in this state, and I'm not sure we're getting our bang for our buck. So rather than just throwing more money at the issue, I think we have to look at our structure. That's the first thing you do in business. If something's not operating right, sure, you can do a big layoff, or you can, handle the cost side of the equation. But what about the revenue side? What about what we're getting back for it? And we need to look at the whole picture, and I don't think that's being done. There's always a lot of contentiousness in the legislature and with the State Board of Education. I think there's a lot of room for efficiencies, a lot of room for doing very well with what we have.
Let's move on to violent crime, because that's obviously also been a hot button issue, particularly in the city of Wilmington, but also elsewhere in the state, cities like Dover and elsewhere. What would you do? How would you address the violent crime issue in Delaware? Well,
I think the violent crime issue has many roots, and I've spoken with some folks from the NAACP the last time around 2 years ago about some of that emerging violence, and I think it's a product, it's a symptom of something much greater. I think we could talk about gun control, we could talk about policing, we could talk about all these programs to deal with the effects of what's not the cause. So I think we have to look at that carefully. We have gentrification issues, we have housing issues, we have education issues. It's not one thing. We have really great people like Maria Cabrera in Wilmington, others who are very much in touch with what's going on. I think we have to tap in to a lot of those local leaders and really listen to them and get the state involved. The state has had up to this point has had a very hands-off approach, particularly to Wilmington. And I think we're looking at maybe a new era in Wilmington. I'm hoping for that. There's been good development in the city, but I work in the city. I work at Del Tech as a professor there, and I see kind of what the street life is like. I've been very critical of how just the town has been designed from a pedestrian point of view. It's not very good for normal people to do a kind of business in town. It's very, very sterilized. So I think we have to create a more of a community, have people involved. And I think when we do that, I think some of these issues will be dealt with. We do have large drug issues in the town. Those can be dealt with as well. They're not isolated to Wilmington by any stretch of the imagination. We have huge problems in Kent County as well as Sussex as well with our opiates. So I think that's also a symptom of another major problem that even goes back to healthcare, goes back to prison reform, goes back to a lot of things.
And beyond those things that you're talking about, this year has been a pretty difficult year around the country and even here locally on the streets. A number of high-profile incidents of police officers shooting individuals and individuals shooting police officers. And that seems to have created perhaps some increased tension, perhaps even mistrust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. How can you address this issue and start to build that trust back?
I think there's a couple of issues. One is information. Certainly me, a lot of other people get their information online. So now we're not only seeing what's happening in Delaware, we're seeing what's happening nationwide. And there's a frustration based on, and I can only characterize it one way, the militarization of our police. They're driving military vehicles, they're dressing in military armor. These are our neighbors, these are our brothers and sisters, and we need to work together and get that back, where we see each other as humans now, not as enemy encampments. I think part of it is paradigmatic in that fashion, the way we've changed and in terms of addressing crime and terrorism and such. It's kind of really driven us. We're better than that, and I think they're all good people. We need to come together and look at that, again, more of a holistic approach.
All right, Andrew Groff, Green Party candidate for governor, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And you can find all of our candidate conversations online at delawarepublic.org and delawaredebates.org. Candidate Conversations are part of Delaware Debates 2016, produced by Delaware Public Media in collaboration with the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communication and with support from AARP. Thanks for watching.